What if I told you that the greatest empire you could ever conquer is not a kingdom on the map, not a city surrounded by walls, not a mountain of gold or possessions, but your own mind? Most people spend their entire lives chasing victories outside of themselves, yet they lose the most important war within. This is where Stoicism becomes more than just an ancient philosophy. It becomes a weapon, a shield, and a guide. Imagine standing in the shoes of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who commanded legions and ruled over vast territories, yet still wrote nightly in his private journal about his struggles with anger, fear, and desire. If the most powerful man in the world needed daily reminders to master himself, what does that tell us about the true nature of strength? It tells us that the real battlefield is internal, and if you don't take control of your thoughts, emotions, and impulses, then no matter what you achieve in the outside world, you remain a prisoner. Now, think about your own life. How often do you feel pulled in 100 directions by distractions? Notifications buzzing on your phone, deadlines suffocating you, people demanding your attention, comparison eating away at your confidence. You wake up with a clear intention, but by the end of the day, you feel drained, reactive, and perhaps even ashamed of wasted time. This is not new to the human condition. 2,000 years ago, Seneca complained of the same thing. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The ancient Stoics faced temptations, political pressures, family struggles, and inner doubts, exactly like we do today. The tools they developed were not meant for a classroom or a dusty library. They were forged in the fires of real life, meant to help people like us master the storms within and stand unshaken by whatever life throws at them. But here's the open secret that most people miss. Stoicism is not about becoming emotionless, cold, or robotic. It is about achieving a state of inner freedom where you are no longer controlled by the rise and fall of circumstances. It's about training your mind so that anger doesn't hijack your decisions, fear doesn't paralyze your actions, and desire doesn't enslave your will. Epictetus, born a slave and later freed, taught that no man is free who is not the master of himself. That statement, if you let it sink in, is revolutionary. Because it means that freedom, happiness, and peace of mind are not granted by governments, wealth, or other people. They are crafted within. This is why, in the modern world filled with chaos, uncertainty, and endless temptations, Stoicism has become not just relevant, but urgent. And this brings us to the first great challenge the Stoics would pose to you. Can you sit quietly with yourself and face your thoughts without distraction? Can you, for even an hour, live as if nothing external had power over your mood or your choices? This is not just theory. It's a test of discipline, one that the emperors, senators, soldiers, and philosophers of old practiced daily. If you accept this challenge, you will begin to notice something remarkable. The world loses its grip on you. Suddenly, insults feel lighter, setbacks feel temporary, and praise feels less intoxicating. You start to see reality clearly, without the distortions of ego and fear. This is the beginning of inner mastery, and in this video, we are going to uncover the exact strategies the Stoics used to achieve it. Strategies that you can start applying right now in your modern life to transform not just how you think, but how you live. Imagine waking up one morning and everything you planned for the day begins to collapse. The project you worked on for weeks is suddenly cancelled. Your closest friend disappoints you. Your phone fills with stressful messages, and on top of it all, you spill coffee on yourself before leaving the house. For most people, this would be enough to ruin the entire day. But the Stoics would see this differently. They would not ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but instead, "What does this teach me about myself?" This subtle shift in perspective is the core of Stoic strength. Marcus Aurelius, who led Rome through wars, plagues, and political betrayals, often reminded himself that life was going to throw countless obstacles in his path, but that none of them had the power to shake his character, unless he gave them permission. And that's the key. Life doesn't ruin us. our responses do. Seneca warned about this very danger when he said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Think about how many times you've magnified a small setback into a full-blown disaster in your mind. A critical comment becomes a crushing judgment. A minor delay feels like the universe plotting against you. The Stoics knew this mental exaggeration is poison, so they trained themselves to pause, step back, and examine the situation without distortion. They practiced something modern psychology now calls cognitive reframing, choosing to see events not as personal attacks, but as neutral happenings. When you see things clearly, without adding unnecessary stories, the world loses much of its power to wound you. And in that clarity, you find freedom. But the Stoics didn't stop at reframing. They prepared in advance for adversity. This was not pessimism, it was training. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every morning they would imagine the difficulties that could arise. Arguments, failures, losses, even death. This way, when such things happened, they weren't shocked. They were ready. Picture yourself expecting the worst traffic on your commute, the most stressful meetings at work, or the sharpest criticism from others. If these things come to pass, you remain calm because you rehearsed them. If they don't, you're grateful. Either way, you win. This is how Stoicism turns life into a no-lose game. Now apply this to your own struggles. Maybe you've been rejected from a job you desperately wanted. Maybe you've been betrayed in love. Maybe you're facing uncertainty about money or health. Instead of drowning in despair, the Stoics would urge you to see these obstacles as training grounds. Epictetus, once a slave who endured brutality, said that hardship was not punishment, but opportunity, a chance to prove your strength, to practice courage, patience, and wisdom. Marcus Aurelius echoed this with his famous line, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the obstacle is not blocking your path, it is your path. This mindset is radical because it flips the script on suffering. Instead of resisting difficulties, you lean into them. Instead of asking, "Why me?" you say, "Try me." Each hardship becomes a forge where your character is hammered into resilience. And here's the open loop to hold on to. The more you practice this, the more untouchable you become. The insults, delays, losses, and fears that once dominated you lose their grip. You begin to carry yourself differently, stronger, calmer, unshakable. And in the next part of this journey, we'll go deeper into exactly how to apply this method to turn every challenge into fuel for your greatness. Think for a moment about how often we live as prisoners of things beyond our control. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you hand them your peace of mind. A stranger on the internet leaves a negative comment, and you give them your confidence. An unexpected expense appears, and suddenly your sense of security collapses. Every day, without realizing it, we surrender our inner power to forces we cannot command. The Stoics saw this trap clearly, and they built their entire philosophy on one timeless distinction: the difference between what is within our control and what is not. Epictetus put it plainly: some things are up to us, and some things are not. If you can fully internalize this truth, you gain a power that most people will never discover. Because when you focus only on what you can control, your thoughts, choices, and actions, you are free. When you chase after what you cannot control, other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, you are enslaved. But here's the challenge. Knowing this truth is not enough. Living it requires daily practice, because your mind will constantly try to pull you toward things outside your control. Think about the last time you argued endlessly with someone, desperately trying to change their mind. Did it work, or did it just leave you drained? This is the cost of trying to control the uncontrollable. The Stoics would remind you, persuasion is not in your hands, only the clarity and calmness with which you present your truth. The outcome belongs to fortune. The same goes for chasing approval. No matter how perfectly you live, someone will misunderstand you. Someone will criticize you. Someone will envy you. If your happiness depends on their applause, you will never be free. Marcus Aurelius asked himself in his journal why he cared so much about the opinions of people who would soon be dust. His answer was liberation. He stopped, seeking validation from those who could never grant true peace. This principle is not only about people, it extends to every corner of life. You cannot control whether the stock market rises or falls, but you can control how wisely you spend and save. You cannot control whether you get sick, but you can control how you care for your body and how bravely you face illness. You cannot control whether storms arrive, but you can control whether you build your shelter strong. By narrowing your circle of concern to the things you truly govern, you reclaim energy, focus, and serenity. Instead of being scattered across countless worries, you become centered, like a mountain unshaken by the wind. And here's where the Stoics were far ahead of their time. They didn't just preach this idea, they practiced it in the harshest conditions. Epictetus, beaten and mocked as a slave, said, "You may chain my leg, but not even Zeus himself can chain my will." Seneca, exiled by emperors and later ordered to take his own life, met his death with calm composure, proving that even in the face of the ultimate uncontrollable, death itself, one could remain sovereign. Marcus Aurelius, plagued by illness and surrounded by political betrayal, reminded himself to act with justice, discipline, and humility, regardless of the chaos outside. Their message to us is clear. If they could master themselves in such conditions, what excuse do we have when facing minor inconveniences? But don't miss the deeper layer here. This practice is not about passive acceptance. It's about channeling your will where it actually matters. By letting go of what you cannot change, you free immense energy to improve what you can. Instead of drowning in frustration, you invest in growth. Instead of wasting hours in resentment, you practice virtue. And here's the loop that will carry us forward. When you master the art of control, you discover a new kind of power, not the power to dominate the world, but the power to rule yourself. Now let's turn to one of the deepest fears every human carries, the fear of loss. Loss of wealth, loss of status, loss of loved ones, and ultimately, the loss of life itself. Modern society often tells us to avoid even thinking about these topics, to distract ourselves with entertainment, possessions, and busyness. But the Stoics did the exact opposite. They turned toward these fears, stared them directly in the face, and through that confrontation, they found peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." At first, this may sound morbid or depressing, but in truth, it is the most liberating thought you can hold. Because when you remember that time is limited, you begin to see clearly what really matters and what is merely noise. The small annoyances, the petty arguments, the endless chasing after things that don't last, all of it begins to lose its grip. Seneca expanded on this when he reminded us that life is not short, but that we waste so much of it on trivialities. Think about how often we postpone joy, telling ourselves, "I'll be happy when I achieve this, when I buy that, when I prove myself." Yet time slips away regardless, and one day we look back and realize we never truly lived. The Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering death, was not about despair, but urgency. It was a call to live fully in the present moment, to stop waiting for a future that may never come. Imagine how differently you would live if you truly felt every morning that this day could be your last. Would you spend it scrolling endlessly? Would you waste it on anger and resentment? Or would you speak more kindly, love more deeply, and pursue what truly matters? This awareness of mortality also reshapes how we deal with the loss of others. The Stoics understood that every person we love is mortal, and clinging to them as if they are permanent only guarantees suffering. Epictetus advised that when you kiss your child goodnight, remind yourself you are kissing a mortal, not to diminish love, but to deepen it. Because when you acknowledge impermanence, every moment with someone becomes infinitely more precious. Instead of taking them for granted, you cherish their presence fully, knowing it could vanish tomorrow. This is not cold detachment. It is the warmest form of love, because it sees clearly. Now, let's bring this into the modern world. We live in an age obsessed with denial of death. People chase endless youth through surgery, luxury, and distraction, pretending as if life will stretch forever. Yet this denial doesn't bring peace. It brings anxiety. By refusing to face the reality of mortality, we create a shadow of fear that follows us everywhere. The Stoics flipped this. They said, accept death, and you remove its sting. Embrace impermanence, and you free yourself from fear. In fact, studies in modern psychology echo this. Research shows that people who contemplate mortality regularly report living with more clarity, purpose, and gratitude. What the Stoics knew intuitively 2,000 years ago, science now confirms. Remembering death teaches us how to live. And here's the open loop that leads us forward. Once you embrace mortality, you unlock a new level of freedom. You stop wasting time on what is meaningless. You stop fearing what is inevitable. And instead, you begin to live with urgency, depth, and courage. But the Stoics did not stop there. They took this awareness and used it to fuel their pursuit of virtue, the one thing death cannot take from you. In the final part of this journey, we'll explore how the Stoics defined virtue as the highest good, why it remains the ultimate measure of a life well lived, and how you can align your actions with it starting today. And so we arrive at the final and most important cornerstone of Stoicism, the pursuit of virtue. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling over the most powerful empire of his time, wrote endlessly about how little wealth, status, or pleasure really matter compared to the cultivation of a virtuous character. Why? Because fortune can strip away everything external in a moment. Your possessions can burn, your reputation can collapse, your health can decline. But virtue, your commitment to wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, remains untouchable. It is the one treasure you carry within that no emperor, no disaster, no twist of fate can ever take from you. And here is the paradox. The more you focus on virtue, the less power external circumstances hold over you, and the freer you become. Let's break this down into the 4 Stoic virtues, not as abstract ideals, but as practical tools you can apply today. Wisdom is not about knowing everything, but about discerning what truly matters. It is the ability to pause, reflect, and ask, is this in my control? Is this aligned with my deeper values? Justice, often misunderstood as simply obeying laws, is far deeper. It is the recognition that we are all connected, and that the good of others is inseparable from our own. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly even when fear is present. And temperance, the least glamorous but perhaps the most crucial, is the discipline to say enough when the world constantly tells you more. Each time you practice these virtues, you fortify yourself against chaos. Each time you embody them, you step closer to the freedom the Stoics spoke of. Freedom from being a slave to fortune. Now imagine if you lived each day with these virtues as your compass. What would change in your life? Would anger have the same power to control you, knowing you can meet it with wisdom? Would anxiety paralyze you, or would courage allow you to step forward anyway? Would greed consume your choices, or would temperance remind you that peace comes not from accumulation, but from sufficiency? The Stoics were not speaking from ivory towers. They lived this philosophy in the raw chaos of life. Marcus Aurelius faced invasions, betrayals, disease, and the crushing weight of empire. And yet, he wrote not about despair, but about gratitude, discipline, and clarity. If he could practice Stoicism in the midst of all that, then surely we can practice it in the noise of modern life. But here's where the loop closes. Remember the first lesson: perception. How you interpret events shapes your reality. Remember the second: emotion. How you redirect feelings defines your strength. Remember the third: control. How you distinguish what belongs to you and what doesn't determines your peace. Remember the fourth: mortality. How you face impermanence determines whether you live with urgency or distraction. And now, the fifth: virtue. This is the thread that weaves all the others together. Without virtue, perception can be warped, emotion misused, control ignored, and mortality wasted. With virtue, each of these becomes a tool for transformation. This is why the Stoics insisted that virtue is the only true good, because it aligns your life with what cannot be destroyed. So here is the challenge I leave you with. When you wake up tomorrow, before the world drowns you in noise, pause and ask yourself, what would a virtuous version of me do today? Would they complain or would they act? Would they gossip or would they encourage? Would they hide in fear or would they step forward in courage? One day, your life will end. That is certain. But the story you write with your choices, that is still unwritten. The Stoics remind us that the measure of a life is not in its length or its riches, but in its alignment with virtue. Write your story wisely, because no one else will write it for you.